All right, let's bring in Dan Balz. He's chief correspondent at the Washington Post, and he is joining now from the Post newsroom in Washington, D.C. All right, Dan, we just heard from the House leadership moments ago, and Speaker Paul Ryan said he's going to stand by Chairman Nunes amid calls for him to recuse himself from the investigation into the Russian meddling. What do you make of that decision by the Speaker?
Well, I don't think it's a surprising decision by the Speaker. I suspect at this point he's going to stand by Chairman Nunes as long as he can. I think the bigger question is whether the House committee, the House Intelligence Committee, can actually produce a genuine investigation and outcome that people will trust. So I think that there will be more calls for an independent commission of some kind. There will be more focus, I suspect, on the Senate Intelligence Committee, which has been pretty quiet through this, but nonetheless is proceeding with its own investigation. So there's a lot of attention to the House committee, but I think that the other investigation on the Senate side and what the FBI is doing are the more relevant and more significant at this moment.
Do you think Nunes will ultimately have to recuse himself just to avoid, any having this investigation be tainted in any way?
Well, I think in some ways that the House committee right now is compromised. The Democrats are feuding with the Republicans. The ranking Democrat, Congressman Schiff, is at war in a sense with Chairman Nunes, and so I think that given that, it is very difficult for them to actually get any real work done. So I think in a sense the question of whether he recuses himself is not insignificant, but it begs the question of whether they're going to get anything done, whether he recuses or not.
Dan, you spoke with DNC Chairman Tom Perez about this Russia investigation earlier today. Let's take a listen to what he had to say and talk about it on the other side.
We know that Vladimir Putin tried to rig the election on behalf of Donald Trump. And believe me, the Democratic National Committee is well aware of this because we were a victim. And there are a remarkable series of coincidences. And we would have to accept them as a remarkable series of coincidences in order to conclude that there was no collusion.
So, Dan, we spoke to Senator John McCain. He himself said the president should acknowledge that the Russians attempted to tamper with our elections. He says he doesn't believe that they succeeded. But how do you take Chairman Perez and the way that he answered your question on this issue?
Well, the question that I asked him was that former DNI James Clapper and the former acting director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, have both said over the last few weeks that from what they have seen, there is no hard evidence of collusion. That doesn't mean there isn't, but they have seen none. And I said to Chairman Perez, have you any concrete evidence? And he said, as you saw in the answer, there are a remarkable set of coincidences. And I think that, it's incumbent on whoever is looking at this in a serious way, the investigators, to decide and be able to answer that question. Are these coincidences, or was there in fact cooperation or collusion? That's what we're all trying to get at an answer to.
Dan, break this down briefly for the American people, because we are talking about not just the collusion which is being investigated, but also the acknowledgement, for example, by Senator McCain that the Russians did attempt to interfere with our elections. Is that investigation still ongoing, or are we just simply talking about collusion now?
No, it's a combination of both, but I think that we've already heard from the intelligence committees who issued a report in January, shortly before President Trump was sworn in, that concluded that the Russians had interfered in the election and that the Russians had done it because they wanted to hurt Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump. And so in that sense, that question has in part been answered. The investigations on Capitol Hill are aimed at giving the American people a better sense of exactly what happened and what can be done to prevent that in the future. But the other side of that investigation is the question of whether there was some kind of cooperation, collusion, whatever you want to call it, between the Trump campaign or associates of Donald Trump and the Russians. And that obviously is a very explosive question.
Dan, I want to talk to you about health care now. As you mentioned, we just heard from Speaker Ryan. It's the first time he actually spoke publicly since the health care bill was yanked and the vote was canceled or postponed. He says that he's ready to work on the health care bill again, that he doesn't want to give a timeline. He wants to make sure that he gets it right. I'm wondering, do you think that the GOP party can readdress this health care bill and do it successfully in any way moving forward?
Well, I don't rule that out, but I think that the bill that they had obviously showed the complications and the difficulties of getting that through not only the House but through the Senate. So there are a lot of hurdles. But look, this is the signature promise of the Republican Party over the last several elections, and I don't think they feel they can give up on it after a matter of days when it crashed and burned in the House last week. So I think the Speaker is correct that they're going to want to try to do that. I don't know whether President Trump is going to want to revisit this issue anytime soon. So while they want to try to keep that promise, we've seen over the last few weeks how difficult that's going to be.
And Dan, we saw the Speaker trying to present a unified front when it comes to this issue of health care. But our reporter, Alan Hay, is in Washington, and he's just reporting now at the end of the House GOP conference. Representative Chris Collins of New York had this to say about the health care debate and how they see the path going forward. Quote, "It's an open wound within our conference right now, and the mood within our conference is very tense. It's going to take a while." And he went on to talk about it's very hard to do with the perfectionists on the far right. What do you make of that?
Well, everybody's frustrated with the Freedom Caucus. And that starts with the President of the United States, who has gone after the Freedom Caucus in some tweets. I mean, he started out on Friday blaming Democrats for the defeat of the bill, but in fact, he shifted to focus on the Freedom Caucus. There is resentment toward that bloc of hard-right conservatives in the House, even among their colleagues. And that has been a problem dating back to Speaker Boehner's tenure in the House as Speaker. It continues to frustrate Speaker Ryan. And until they can solve that problem, they're going to have a very difficult time getting things done. They've got to deal with spending and budget issues coming up. This health care thing is not going to be easily resolved. They've got tax reform or tax bill coming up. And all of those things are likely to continue to expose the fractures within the House conference.
So the president is going to try to shift the conversation a little bit today toward the environment and jobs. He'll sign an executive order that basically is repealing many of President Obama's climate change regulations. Do you see this as an effective move coming off of the health care failure, maybe a move to something that his supporters could get behind?
Well, there will be great support within the Republican Party for what the president is doing today. There was strong opposition when President Obama did what he did in terms of these regulations, and therefore there will be support for that today. There are certain things around which the party can unite. Now, one of the things we've seen in the early days of the Trump administration is that they can move fairly quickly on executive orders. And you can do certain things through executive orders, but you can't do everything that they need to do. So there's a combination of what they can do through executive orders and regulatory work within the agencies and within the executive branch. And then they have to have a legislative strategy to get through some of these larger questions. But this today will, I suspect, be quite popular among many people in the Republican Party.
Dan Balz of the Washington Post, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.